From fresh milk to the perfect wheel of artisan cheese. Go inside the kitchen with Julia Carter as she breaks down the science and soul of cheese making. Discover the flavors of a Park Rapids homestead, next on 218 Life.
Production funding of 218 Life is made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Hug Hydronics, committed to making in-floor heating simple, providing in-floor heating solutions for both commercial and residential. More info at hughydronics.com. Closed captioning of 218 Life is provided in part by Renaissance Hearing Center, committed to enhancing your hearing, allowing you to enjoy life's most important moments.
We called it a homestead. That was the goal initially, was to sustain ourselves, to provide as much as possible our own food.
We have 5 kids, and that was important to us to feed them the best. Before we got a milk cow, we were buying about 11 gallons of milk from a local farm every week. We'd go every Monday and we'd fill our jars. And I one day said, I think that we could probably afford our own milk cow. And that's when we got Daisy Bell. And we got her from a local Amish man, and his sister owned the grocery store, and she knew I got a cow. And the next time I went there, she said, "You are gonna need this cheese recipe." And she gave me some cheese that they make, and sure enough, I've been making that cheese for over 10 years. We had so much milk from one cow, and then when she had her baby, it was a girl. Well, then we had another cow, and we had to do something with all that milk or get rid of the cow, so I thought I better make cheese. So I started making cheese, and I started making hard cheese, and it's been a learning process. Pretty full. So these are sous vides, and this is, I heat the water, and that's what keeps my milk at the right temperature. So I'll just check the temperature here and make sure. So this came in and 91.94. So what we're making today is we're going to make a Lancashire, which is in the cheddar family. And what we want to do is we want to add our culture, and we're going to keep this in the low 90s for the entire make. So that's the highest temperature it's going to be. So I'm getting ready to add our culture, and I'm going to add a culture because our milk, when it comes from the cow, it has good bacteria, it has bad bacteria. And what we want to do is we want to add culture, and that is going to take the good bacteria and it's going to take it in the direction you want it to go. So when we add this, it's going to kind of tell the milk, we're going to make this cheese. Maybe I'll explain it this way. So you can buy cultures from a cheese supply store. I use New England Cheese Supply, and this would be your culture, and it's a powder. And you would add just maybe a half a teaspoon, depending on your milk and what you're wanting. But as a homesteader, I can use this as a culture. So I'm going to use my yogurt to culture my cheese today. So the cheese we're making today is actually called a Plowman's cheese, and it's a type of cheddar, and it's something that was served like in a plowman's lunch. They would have some kind of crusty bread, they would have a chunk of cheese, and this cheese, the plowman's cheese, it has chives, and it has onions, and it has garlic. So it's a very flavorful cheese, typically served with pickles, served with pickled onions, something like that. So anyway, that's what we're making. We're going to add our culture now. About a cup to each pot. These are about 5 gallons. And then we're going to stir it in for a couple minutes. Just make sure it's evenly distributed. One thing I often tell people is when you're making cheese, it's not as much about the recipe as it is technique. When you put the yogurt in, it kind of wants to just kind of stick to the top. That you can see the fat in the top of this milk. And it kind of how fat wants to rise. It wants the culture to rise, and it kind of brings that. So you kind of, when you stir it, you want to push it down. You don't want to stir it too hard. You do want to be gentle with your milk. Kind of as pretty much with cheese making, you want to be gentle when you're stirring the curds, whatever you're doing, you want it to be gentle. So I think we've got that stirred in pretty good. And we're going to let this stand and culture, or ripen would be the right word. You're going to let this ripen for 30 minutes. So our milk is cultured, and if you will look, the cream has come to the top a little bit more, but now it's cultured. So we're just going to stir that back in. Okay, and now we're going to add rennet. So this is calf rennet. So rennet is what's going to give you your curds. We're going to put that in there, and it's going to make it into a firm mass. Calf rennet comes from the stomach, the fourth stomach of a calf. And they take that, a little piece of that stomach, and they can put it with water or whey, something like that, and then they can make the rennet. Like used to, they would use whey, and they would put the calf, little piece of the stomach in there. So that's what this is. If you're buying milk in the store and it's pasteurized, you're going to need more rennet than fresh raw milk, because the raw milk, it's ready to be made into cheese. The pasteurization and the homogenation really is what causes it to not want to curd up. So if you're making cheese with pasteurized milk from the store, you would want to add calcium chloride. That's something I don't know a lot about, but what it does is it adds calcium back in so that you can make cheese with it. So, and usually there's a couple of dribbles, and then we're going to stir it in slowly. And you would not want to stir it more than a minute. I don't even think I'd do it a minute. You kind of want it just distributed through the milk. And then once you get it stirred, you want to stop it with your spoon and keep it still. And once again, this is one of those things where you're not following a recipe, but you have to know the technique to making cheese. We always advise getting organic animal rennet. Then you're staying away from anything that's going to be genetically modified or anything weird, microbial or something. So to use just organic calf rennet. Okay, so we're going to let that sit. And this is going to take probably, I can check it again probably in 45 minutes, but it's probably going to take about an hour. And then it's going to be it'll be a solid mass, and that'll be fun for us to see. So there you go. Okay, we're going to check our curd. So we put in the rennet, and then we let it sit, and now we're going to check and see if it's firmed up enough to cut our curds. So I'm going to stick this knife in here. What we want is for it to be like a thick yogurt or jello type texture, and it's not quite ready. So I like showing people before it's quite ready. So you can see that that's not ready yet, and that's what it might look like. And if it's that way, we're gonna let it sit for just a little bit longer. So let's say we're gonna let it sit for 15 minutes. We're gonna check our curds. Some people put their hand in there, and you can do it that way. I use a knife. You can just put your knife in, pull it back, and see how that nice clean cut stays there. I can do that here too. Nice clean cut. It's a little bit loose, but I think it's gonna be fine. So a lot of times in a recipe, it's going to tell you, I've talked about technique is important. One thing, it tells you to cut the curd, and what you're going to do when it says to cut the curd is you're going to slice it. If I do this one, would this be better here? You're going to slice it. This one here takes about I think it's a 1/4 inch curd, and you're just going to cut it and make like a checkerboard pattern, and you'll watch and you'll see the whey coming up. And this is gonna, that's what we're doing, is releasing the whey. And now we're gonna go crossways this way. No pun intended. Then when we get done here, we're gonna cut it the other way. We're going to cut it horizontally next. And that's done by just taking your knife and going like this. And you go all the way down to the bottom, and then you go the other direction. And you see how these nice little cubes. There's a curd. So you're just going to cut them all up, and that's releasing the whey. And as that sits there, you can see the fat on top. Once again, those jerseys give so much cream. So we're gonna let these cubes sit for a minute, and that's gonna solidify them a little bit, and they're gonna get a little, maybe like a little bit of a skin on them. Like you think of maybe a boiled egg, the skin that you might see on a boiled egg. So we're gonna let this sit for a minute, and then, so that's cutting the curds. And sometimes I use this because I have a lot of things to do. So I take this and I cut the curds this way, and this works quite well for the cheese I'm making today. And some cheeses I might need to use the knife, but today I'm using this one. I'm gonna use this. And as I do this, remember that a lot of people are making 1 gallon at a time. You can do that on your stovetop. And you can just use a little knife or a little whisk. Anybody can make cheese in their own kitchen. Okay, without a lot of special things, you can just use what you have. Okay, so I've got this cut, and I'm gonna let this sit now and let those curds, I'm gonna leave this in here because I'm gonna stir it with that in a little bit. And we're gonna leave these. So we're waiting and letting this sit for 10 minutes because we're wanting the curds to heal. And so when we cut them and we're releasing whey, we don't want them just to go to pieces. So they're gonna be a little bit of a firmer cube. And so we're waiting for 10 minutes so that can happen. All right, so it has been 10 minutes and our curds have healed. We've got some, you can see these little squares. They're gonna hold their shape a little bit better, but we're gonna stir it, and that's gonna release even more whey. And when you do that, obviously it's gonna shrink the curds. And depending on how you stir, how big your curds are, it's gonna make a difference in your flavor. Because did you know, if people think about it, all cheese is made out of the same ingredients. All cheese has milk, culture, rennet, and salt. Those are the ingredients. You might add jalapenos, but that's not what makes your cheese. It just adds flavor. But all cheese is the same ingredients, and then it just depends on what you do to it. So if your curds are smaller, they'll be drier, and you'll have a drier cheese. If you want a moist cheese, you're going to want bigger curds. I make a gorgonzola, an Italian blue cheese, and you want the blue to go through that, and you want it to be a moist paste, so you have large curds on that. And that's a good example of a cheese that you would have to use a knife with. You don't want to make your curds little. Okay, I've stirred this for 10 minutes, and as you can see, our curds are smaller. There's that one, and there's this one. And I'll show you here. And what you want to do when you're stirring is you're wanting to break up the clumps. You don't really want to stir it vigorously or anything. You just want it to not be clumping at the bottom, because right now it's trying to be cheese and it's wanting to clump up and make cheese. And I will show you these little curds. And it's almost a texture of a soft-boiled egg. You can see that split there. And that's what you want. And you want to be able to smash it like that, and it doesn't completely go to pieces. So what we're going to do now is we're going to let this sit for 30 minutes, and it's going to all sink to the bottom. And then we do want it to kind of clump up. So we're going to let this go for 30 minutes now. Okay, so our curds have sunk to the bottom, and we're going to ladle them out. Probably if you're making this at home, you might have this in a pot on your stove and you're using a gallon of milk. You can just pour this into your strainer. I'm going to ladle it because I don't want to lift this 5-gallon pot. So I'm going to take these out and see how beautiful those are. Those are very nice little curds, and they've sunk to the bottom. They're really trying hard to be cheese. And then we're going to let these drain. We're going to let these drain for about an hour. During that time, we're going to try to keep them at about 88, 91 degrees, somewhere in there, because you don't want them to get too cold or too warm. So I'm going to put this strainer right back on top of this warm whey and just let it drain right back into the pot. So our cheese has been draining for about an hour, and now we're going to cut it into slabs, and we're going to do what's called cheddaring the cheese. So if you wondered why a cheddar was called a cheddar, it's because it goes through a cheddar process. So we're going to cut our cheese into slabs. And the idea of this is to get more whey out. So we're going to turn them, and we're just going to flip these cheeses, or these slabs, to make this cheese. And so you can show you the texture of it. And we're going to flip these a few times, and they're going to become almost like a chicken breast, is a good way to describe it. We're just going to pile them on top of each other. And then in 10 minutes, we're going to come back and we're going to flip them around, and that is cheddaring. And we'll do that about 3 times. Okay, I'm flipping these for one last time for a total of 3 times. And if you could feel this, it feels like a chicken breast, very much like a chicken breast, and that is what we're looking for. And that has expelled whey, and we are going to just flip all of these. Then we're going to mill the cheese. And by the way, if you wanted cheese curds, right now, you could slice this into cheese fingers. You could salt it, and you'd have cheese curds. And we're going to mill it into little pieces. We're going to add our salt and our seasonings, because my plow cheese takes onion, parsley, and a little bit of garlic. So I'm going to add that when I mill it, which means I'm going to tear it into little bitty pieces. So this is our cheese cave. It's incognito cheese cave. Anyway, this is where we store our cheese. Cheese is happiest maturing at 55 degrees. So we keep this at about 50 degrees or so to 55 degrees year round. and our cheese matures quite nicely in here. So we have everything is dated. We keep everything, notes on everything so that we know when we made it. I cultured it with yogurt. Sometimes I'll have notes on there like I forgot to do something or I did something later. And this is all done with a CoolBot. And so we have an air conditioner system in the summer and we have a heater system in the winter to keep everything the right temperature. A lot of cheese you want to age a year or better, so that's what this is. This is where we age it all. When we first started making cheese, a lot of obviously cheesemakers don't have a facility like this. You can age cheese in your refrigerator at a colder temperature. It just takes longer. So we would keep cheese, especially in the crispers of our refrigerator. And some people use like a wine refrigerator because you can turn the temperature to 55. And if they do small cheeses, they can use that. So yeah. All right, we've got our curds are all milled. And we're ready to add our salt and our seasoning. So I'm going to add to this, when you make cheese, it's about a tablespoon per gallon. And so I'm going to put in 1/3 cup in here. And then this is a Plowman's cheese, which has chives. I would measure, but I don't usually do that, so I'm not going to start now. And just a smidge of garlic. And then a little bit of minced onion. And you may have heard of this cheese being called a Cotswold, but this is a Plowman's cheese at our house. So now we have all of our herbs in there and we're just going to mix them in. There's a little bit of whey in there, but that's okay. That's good. It's gonna, you see that pretty good? These right now would be tasty little tidbits. A little bit milky tasting, but they would be, it smells very good. I can smell it. Even in a cheese factory, you're gonna have these chunks. And actually in a cheese factory, they have big shredding machines. They put in the chunks of cheese and then they shred it into little pieces and it comes out like this. And then they put it in molds much like this. And they fill it up with their cheese and then we're gonna put weight on it. And the weight is gonna make all these pieces come together. This cheese will have no weight put on it until tomorrow. It's just gonna sit and drain. And so you can add any flavorings you like. I do jalapeno. We like mustard seed in our cheeses. Some people like dill. So, okay, there you go. And I'm gonna put this cover on it, this little thing, and this is what will push it down. But for today, it's just gonna keep it covered to keep all the little beasties out of it, as my friend says. So there you go. So we're done until tomorrow. This is Tuesday's cheese and this is Monday's cheese. So I'm gonna take the weights off of these. These are ready to be dried. So I'm gonna take those weights off now and we'll take a look at those. So the weight is pressing the cheese and it's gonna it's gonna expel the whey out of it, and it's also gonna close up the rind of the cheese. You can look at this one and see how bumpy that is. And we want it to be smoother than that. So we're gonna close up, we're gonna knit the curds together is what it's actually called. So we'll look at these, and these have been sitting under 50 pounds of weight since yesterday afternoon. This is a homemade cheese press my husband made for me. Actually, my little boy made one for me, and he made the other, but it's just PVC pipe boards and saved me a couple $100. So, and this is called a follower, and this is what presses it down like that. So I'm gonna stick this here. This cheese is ready to be dried, and this is a Plowman's cheese. It's what I've been making recently. And here it comes. And there we go. And we're going to let this air dry, and this will air dry for a day, maybe 2 days, kind of depends on the humidity. And then we're going to vacuum seal it, which will close it up even more and knit the curds together better. And then we'll move it to our cheese cave. I think everybody should make cheese, and everybody who wants to especially should make cheese. Yeah. I always go back to my first cheese, Velveeta. You don't need anything special. You need a thermometer, and you would use citric acid, baking soda. You would need a pot for your milk and a strainer to strain your milk, and it's that simple. And salt. And it's fun.
Production funding of 218 Life is made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Hug Hydronics, committed to making in-floor heating simple, providing in-floor heating solutions for both commercial and residential. More info at hughydronics.com. Closed captioning of 218 Life is provided in part by Renaissance Hearing Center, committed to enhancing your hearing, allowing you to enjoy life's most important moments. Production costs for this program have been made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the members of Lakeland PBS.